Welcome to The Victory Kitchen, the podcast all about American food rationing during World War II. I'm your host, Sarah Creviston Lee, author, historian, and vintage foodie. I'll be exploring the logistics of food rationing, featuring wartime cookbooks and recipes, and highlighting real home front experiences. We're going to be learning exactly what our grandmothers had to do to get their food to fight for victory. Hello, welcome back to another episode of The Victory Kitchen. This is episode number 14, You Are What You Eat. But first I wanted to tell you quickly about a couple things. The week before Thanksgiving, I co-hosted a wartime recipe swap on Instagram with my friend Sarah. Her handle is at vintage_facade. So for 5 days, we made Thanksgiving recipes from wartime and posted about them and shared all the recipes, including a bunch of extras. And we used the hashtag #VictoryKitchenThanksgiving. We had so much fun doing that we decided to do it again for Christmas. So we will have a Christmas wartime recipe swap. It will be December 14th through the 16th. And it will be 3 days of Christmas sweets, cookies, cakes, and candy. We'll be posting using the hashtag #VictoryKitchenChristmas. So if you want to join us, come on over to Instagram and follow me at Victory Kitchen Podcast and Sarah at vintage_facade. Okay, so for today's episode, we are going to be talking about another favorite topic of mine. I know I have a lot, but it is menu planning. I think I am just so fascinated with wartime menu planning because I'm so bad at it, I guess. I'd like to be better, and I'd like to learn more about menu planning just, for my own family's sake, saving money on food and stuff like that. So in wartime, menu planning was a way to help provide proper nutrition. And we've talked a little bit about why nutrition was so important in the last 2 episodes. But was that all a menu needed to do? No. It needed to save health. It needed to save money. It needed to save food. And most of all, save time. Now, these are aspects to menu planning that we still use today. These are the reasons why people menu plan. And I really like how one cookbook has a specific meal planner's creed. This comes from the Modern Family Cookbook by Meta Givens. And I'll actually be talking a lot about this cookbook later in the episode. But I wanted to read this meal planner's creed first. It says, "The meal planner's creed. The health of my family is in my care. Therefore, I will spare no effort in planning the right kinds of food in the right amounts. Spending the food dollar for maximum value is my job. Therefore, I will choose among the variously priced foods in order to save money without sacrificing health. My family's enjoyment of food is my responsibility. Therefore, I will increase their pleasure by planning for variety, for flavorful dishes, for attractive color, for appetizing combinations. My family's health, security, and pleasure depend on my skill in planning meals. Therefore, I will treat my job with the respect that is due it." All right, so that is the meal planner's creed. I don't know about you, but it sounds like they're taking it really seriously. And that really was the case. It was so important to plan healthful meals for the family because what goes in is what comes out. So if we put in good food, then we'll have the energy and nutrition we need for our bodies to do what they need to do in wartime. But if not, then we won't have that energy and stamina that we need. So that's really what this is saying. I also think this is kind of a clue as to how our food culture, shifted during wartime, placing an emphasis on the attractiveness of food, of the color and texture and temperature varieties of food served. That really had a huge impact. And I think we see that even more in the 50s. Just the attractiveness of food was, half of the importance of the food itself, not just eating, but seeing it and how beautiful it was. Because if you have, I don't know about you, I've had some pretty poor visuals of food that I've served my family that they're all pretty much the same color. Like I realized one time, oh, all our food is orange today. I didn't plan that out thoroughly. And I even in my cooking, I can see how that affects how I feel about the end product. If I am making something and it only has yellows or and oranges, I feel like it needs like a splash of green in there, or something like that. So color really does play an important part of our appetite. In one of the Health for Victory meal planning guides, in particular the August 1943 issue, they have an analogy to building healthful menus that I really like. They say that building healthful menus is a lot like building a house. The foundation is milk and milk products, which are food group number 4. And remember, this is drawing from the wartime 7 food groups. The beams of the house are the meats and meat alternatives, which is group 5. The walls are made of bread and cereals, which is group 6. The roof is constructed from potatoes, other vegetables, and fruits, which is group 3. The windows are green and yellow vegetables, which is group 1. The doors and screens are oranges, tomatoes, grapefruit, which is group 2. And finally, the furnace, butter and margarine, group 7. It says in the book, there are a lot of parts to a house, and one single part doesn't mean much without the others. You have to start with a foundation. Yet a foundation alone won't give you protection, nor will walls alone or a roof alone make a sound, snug house. It's exactly the same in planning healthful menus. One food alone, or 3 or 5, won't build sound health. And remember this, most foods depend on each other to give us the greatest health value for any one food. That's why it takes all of the basic 7 food groups to build a balanced diet. Wow, I couldn't have put it better myself. This really is the nutrition view of wartime in a nutshell. And I think these still apply today. We can't just go around eating carrots all day and say, I'm a really healthy person. Of course, carrots are great, but you need a whole bunch of other things to round out your diet. So I really love that. There were other basic tips that they gave for planning meals. One was the food value. That's the nutritional value that we've already talked about a lot. A second thing was the variety is the spice of meals. Texture, color, temperature, cooked or raw, the shape of it, the flavor. All of those things play an important part of eating a meal. Also, vitamin Z for zest. I found this tip very interesting because I never thought about it. What they're talking about is the atmosphere of the dinner table. Here's what it says in the book. You won't find it on a scientific list, but Z is one of the most important vitamins of all. Flavor, appearance, how things are served are part of it. So is the atmosphere of the dinner table, particularly laughter and pleasant conversation. It also says, don't skimp on eye appeal. A couple of lettuce leaves, a sprig of parsley, a few strips of green pepper garnishing the platter of a meatloaf often make all the difference between let's get this over with and what a grand dinner. It says to bring out your best china once in a while. Put a posy or candles on the table. Give a bit of glamour to everything you serve. It will enhance your reputation as a wonderful cook. Once again, we can see like this, them placing an emphasis on this wasn't just for, to make the food look pretty. It was for morale and I guess, to boost your reputation as a cook. One other tip that they give is that serving sizes should be based on the job. Whether they're a child or a teenager, pregnant or nursing mother, it's important to take those factors into consideration when planning meals. I don't know if you've given menu planning a try before or not, but it's hard. It's a really hard job. But in wartime, it was practically dizzying. You not only had to account for nutrition and, portion sizes. You also had to think about the ration points and how much money you had to spend. Oh, it was just so, so hard. And I think when they threw in this nutrition thing, like, hey, you need to feed your families really healthful meals and make it attractive on top of that, I think I would have just thrown up my hands and given up. But they did have some helps available to them. In many communities, classes were taught about how to menu plan, and they would give examples of meals and recipes. And I think at some of the classes, they even prepared some of these foods for them so they could see and try them out. There are newspaper articles with advice and tips, including a bunch of store ads that featured their own tips for menu planning because, they were being helpful, but also with the hope that you would come and shop at their store. Many women's magazines featured menu plans from a few days to an entire month in some cases, depending on the magazine, and usually included most of the recipes that they talk about. And then, of course, there are cookbooks and pamphlets. Just like they usually had a section about nutrition, there was almost always a section teaching about menu planning. Now, as I was preparing for this episode, I was trying to figure out how was I going to go about talking about menu planning, because it is so complicated and it's just so different for everybody. And even in wartime, there are so many different ways to menu plan. So what I decided was that I was going to share with you 3 case studies for different types of menu planning. So you could see some examples from published cookbooks of ways that they actually taught women to menu plan. So first up is the Modern Family Cookbook by Meta Givens that I mentioned earlier in this episode. It was published in 1942. The interesting thing about this cookbook is that it includes menus planned for the entire year. I don't know about you, but this is kind of awesome. I think this was really neat that they just did all the work for you. So if you're someone that just, would give up in frustration at the idea of any menu planning, this would be a great book because as you go through it, it could teach you how to menu plan. It includes all the recipes for all the menus. So as you can imagine, it's a pretty thick book. Now in this book, they have what is called the diet pattern. The diet pattern is how they built each and every one of their menus. And this is their diet pattern. 1 is 1 quart of milk for each child and 1 pint for each adult, supplied by 3 quarts fresh milk and 2 cups evaporated milk, the approximate equivalent of 1 quart of fresh milk. Number 2 is 1 serving of citrus fruit or tomatoes or tomato juice. Number 3 is 1 other fruit, either fresh, canned, or dried. Number 4 is 1 green, preferably leafy or yellow vegetable, raw or cooked. Number 5 is 1 other vegetable, either fresh, canned, or dried, aside from potato. Number 6 is 1 serving of potato. Number 7 is whole grain or enriched cereal, bread, breakfast food, cake, etc. Number 8 is 1 serving of meat, fish, or cheese, liver or other meat, sundry, weekly. Number 9 is 1 egg daily if possible, otherwise at least 3 or 4 times weekly. And number 10, 3 to 5 tablespoons of butter or oleomargarine fortified with vitamin A. And then it has a little asterisk at the bottom saying that this diet pattern is in agreement with the standards set up by the Committee on Food and Nutrition of the National Research Council, which was organized to advise U.S. governmental agencies on nutrition problems connected with the National Defense Program. So they are kind of taking their own twist on the basic 7 food groups. And they use this pattern for all of their menus. So it has, the list, like I just read, of the diet pattern. It even has this handy little visual picture of a wheel, but instead it's not called the Basic 7. It says the Daily Diet Guide. And around the edge, meat, vegetables, potatoes, eggs, butter, bread, cereal, fruits, and milk. And then inside it tells you the different serving sizes. It also tells you the caloric requirements for different ages of children, boys and girls, and then a moderately active man and a moderately active woman. And it even has a table of the normal rate at which children should gain weight, the functions of vitamins, food sources of the vitamins, and it has this huge table of all of these foods and their units of calories. It's just got so much information on the nutrition value of foods and even 100 calorie portions of 100 everyday foods. I kind of had to smile at this because there was a trend for a while. Was it in the 2000s? I can't remember now, but where different companies were making 100 calorie packs of snacks and foods and things like that. And so that's what this reminded me of. So to get 100 calories from an apple, you eat one large apple. If you want 100 calories from cornflakes, you eat 3/4 cup of cornflakes. So that's just really kind of an easy way to calculate your calories. It teaches why you use menus. It's just got a lot of different things in here. It's, like I said, it's a really thick book. Now, how they do the actual menus for the whole year is interesting. They don't date it. This is how they explain the dating system. The daily menus have been dated so they can be used year after year. The first Monday in January may fall on any date from the 1st to the 7th. So instead of dating the menus Monday, January 5th, Tuesday, January 6th, and so on, which would apply only to 1 year, a different system has been adopted. Dates appear only on the Monday menus and cover all the dates on which Mondays may fall. Thus, the first Monday in January is dated January 1 through 7. The second Monday, January 8 through 14, and so on. Special holiday meals are listed in a separate section, since most of them don't fall on the same day every year. They also include menus for children's parties, for birthdays, and for other great occasions. This book also teaches how to make substitutions and adjust the quantities, because not, every family size is the same. The menus were written for average activities and average appetites for a 5-member family, husband, wife, and 3 children. And it also encourages substitutions as needed. So the menus aren't considered hard and fast rules. They say you may occasionally wish to substitute other foods for those in a given menu. Whether because strawberries give Susie the hives, or because pork chops are not the best meat buy on the day when they are suggested, or because you have less or even more to spend than usual. This can easily be done, but to keep the menu well balanced nutritionally, be sure to substitute something from the same class of food. That is, if you take out a fresh fruit, put another fresh fruit in, not a pudding. If you take out a leafy green vegetable, substitute another vegetable of the same type, such as cabbage for lettuce or spinach for broccoli. That way you won't be losing the, rounded nutrition of that meal. I really love this last paragraph where they talk about how to get cooperation from the family, because I was thinking this exact same thing when I was flipping through their menus. I was like, oh my, I don't know if my children will rebel or not if I start feeding this to them. They say, you can use the diet pattern and the menus together as the basis for a sort of educational game, which will teach every member of the family more about nutrition and how to choose foods. Help them to see how the food they eat and enjoy fits into the pattern of what they must eat to be healthy and strong. For if they do not cooperate with you by eating the food you provide, they will not be well fed, no matter how carefully you plan their diet. And one way of increasing their willingness to eat the right food is to interest them in its choice and the reasons behind it. I think I can vouch for this, because anytime I've included my kids in, like you plan one dinner a week, they really get behind that, because they're like, wow, I actually have a choice. And they really like having that power, to decide what we're going to be eating. I just really like that they call it, let's just make it a game for teaching your whole family. I mean, yeah, you could. If you want to learn menu planning by practice with most of the work done for you, this cookbook is a great teacher. So by using the menus and swapping things out for taste and preference within the same food categories, by the end of a year, you would be an expert in writing up a healthy menu in 1940s style. Another cookbook that's similar to this is called the Alice Bradley Menu Cookbook. The edition I have is from 1944, but fair warning, it is a much fancier cookbook, and I feel like they don't repeat things very often, so it's new stuff all the time. And some of the ingredients are kind of hard to find. So, yeah, it's a very fun cookbook to have. But I think for just basic foods, the Modern Family Cookbook is definitely the way to go. One last thing that I'd like to mention that is really cool about the Modern Family Cookbook is that on the left, they say the meals and, the menu plans. Then they have the recipe number, not page number, but recipe number next to the things for you to make. And then on the right, in the right column, is the foods that you'll need to make that meal. And so from that, you can make your grocery list based on what you have at home and, what you know that you'll need, because it's all listed right there. I think that's super handy. All right, so for our next case study, this is the Health for Victory Meal Planning Guides by Westinghouse. You hear me talk about these a lot because I am a huge fan. But what's different about these from the Modern Family Cookbook is that they use monthly menus. A new issue would come out each month, and it would have that month's menus in it. So it had a month's worth of menus for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and the lunchbox with all the recipes included. Now, in the Modern Family Cookbook, I forgot to mention, they include breakfast, lunch, and dinner. No lunchbox recipes. But sometimes, like on Sundays, they would say breakfast, dinner, and supper. So dinner was the biggest meal of the day in the middle of the day, and then supper was a lighter meal. But in these Health for Victory meal planning guides, I like that they include the lunchbox as a separate menu. It also includes a market list for everything that you'll need for that month. So for each week, it has the things that you'll need to buy in a handy table. So on the left, it has the item, and then on the right, the amount that you'll need. And in one of the booklets, they give this little tip. It is suggested you take the order list and check it against your own supplies on hand, particularly staples such as salt, sugar, baking powder, enriched white flour. Amounts are for a family of 5. Increase or decrease amounts according to your needs. Figure ration points according to the current allowances. And then one of my most favorite things about these menus is that they have an advanced preparation outline listed by date. So these are things to do ahead of time to get meals on the table quickly for the next day. I think this is absolutely brilliant. For example, I'm looking at the December 1943 issue, and it says for December 25th, make coffee cake and bake it. Mix dry ingredients for soya cocoa. Casserole of turkey and spaghetti may be prepared and placed in covered dish in the refrigerator. Wash and clean the turnips. And then you're ready for December 26th. I'm curious what they had you do for December 24th. Oh, here we go. Let's read this. So to get ready for Christmas Day, it says, mix dry ingredients for spiced apple muffins. Clean turkey and get dressing well started. Make cranberry sauce. Mix dry ingredients for Amherst pudding. Okay, so I guess that's what we're having for Christmas Day. So I just think, I think this is the key to the success of these menus in these Health for Victory booklets, is they are showing you how to save time. A lot of these cookbooks say saving time is so important, but they don't really lay it out for you. Like, well, how do I do that? This one tells you exactly how. Now, this issue also has an important note. It says, beverages have been left out of these menus purposely, with the exception of buttermilk and cocoa, which either require special marketing or special preparation. If milk is rationed and difficult to get, adults should drink a minimum of 1 large glass a day, plus whole milk on cereal once a day, and 1 large serving of food which has milk as its main ingredient, which could also be evaporated milk. Children and expectant or nursing mothers should have a quart of milk a day. That is, they should drink milk at least twice a day, and in addition use whole milk on cereal or other food at least once a day, and have at least 1 food in which milk is the main ingredient. Cream, soups, custards, puddings, for instance. I really love this because they talk about if milk is rationed and difficult to get. And if you remember from the milk rationing episode, that was the case for some people in the country. Remember, milk wasn't nationally rationed, but it was on a local basis. So I just really like that they acknowledge that for some people, milk is hard to get in 1943. And so if it is hard to get, this is the minimum of what you need to drink to have this nutrition. They also feature meatless menus and jiffy meals, which are ready in 35 minutes. This December issue also has articles that focus on meeting meat problems and how to get the proper amount of protein. One article is called Soybeans Are Wartime Meat. So depending on the issue, they had a different focus for each one, which is why it was important to buy each one when it came out, because they had new information in each one. So when you have them as a whole, you've really got a great picture of wartime rationing. There are other similar sources in magazines like McCall's Ladies' Home Journal, Women's Home Companion, and the Farm Journal and Farmer's Wife magazines. Many of these cookbooks also featured, from a week or 2 weeks worth of menu suggestions, including holiday menus, though their main focus was mostly just recipes. I can't remember which magazine it is that does include a whole month. I think it's maybe McCall's that has the whole month of menus. I'm a little fuzzy on this. I think it's just dinner ideas. It doesn't have, the breakfast, lunch, dinner. I could be wrong about that though. But if you have one of these magazines, you can flip to the food section and see, these menu ideas and recipes. All right, for our final case study, I'm going to be talking about one of my all-time favorite wartime cookbooks, and that is Thrifty Cooking for Wartime by Alice B. Winsmith. This was published in 1942, and it's a cookbook I've actually featured here in the podcast back in season 1. But today we're going to be studying it from the vantage point of the menu planning. Guess what? There's no menus at all. This book's primary function was to provide basic recipes with multiple variations. So depending on what you could afford or what was in your cupboard or what was available at the store, you could provide filling, healthful meals for your family. This had different benefits. Depending on what was being rationed or what you could get at the store, it could be frustrating trying to plan and cook from a set menu and trying to swap everything out. Or if a housewife preferred a less structured approach to menu planning, like me, this cookbook allowed for that, and it let you plan meals based around what you already had and can find at the store. So this book really provided a lot more freedom. Now, you would have to be kind of up on the nutrition aspect of things because it talks a little bit about nutrition, but it doesn't show you a clear-cut guide how to provide that nutrition. So that's something you'd probably have to get from a different cookbook to make sure that you are providing everything your family needs in their meals. I wanted to read this section from the cookbook, Thrifty Ways for War Days, because it mentions quite a few interesting things. It says, this collection of economical recipes with their numerous variations will be found helpful in many ways during the period of war conservation. The hundreds of thrifty ideas for the use of leftovers and other materials at hand will prove to be a real inspiration in your problems of cooking and meal planning. There are ideas to fit every part of the country, and we must bear in mind that what would seem thrifty and economical to some might be a real extravagant to others. There may be meatless and wheatless days ahead, as there were in the last World War. In this book are many helpful suggestions that will make your meal planning easier while going through these experiences. After all, we owe it to our families to keep the home fire burning as comfortably as possible, while they are so willingly doing everything to protect it. Sugar rationing may present a problem to many, and all of us must cooperate. To meet this situation, many recipes call for honey, molasses, or maple sugar. In fact, any of the recipes calling for sugar in this book can be used with one or more of these substitutions, furnishing the sweet ingredient. Some spices will become more difficult to buy, so minimum amounts are used in the recipes. If you have plenty or live where you can easily obtain them, use more if it suits your taste. There is no reason why we shouldn't use what we have, but let's be thrifty and make everything go as far as possible. If some of the flavorings to which we are accustomed become more difficult to get, or the prices do not fit the budget, variations following the basic recipes offer suggestions for the use of grated fruit rinds and juices. If the flavor of almond is a favorite in your family, save your peach, plum, and apricot pits. When they are dry enough to handle, crack the pits and save the meats by spreading them out in a warm place to dry. Pound these to a pulp or run them through the food chopper using the smallest knife. The flavor will be an addition to anything you would flavor with almond, to any fruitcake or cookies. The children in the family will enjoy taking on this project of preservation. Keep the unused pits in a tightly covered container in a dry, warm place. It takes only a few for flavoring. With the prices of meat soaring and our budgets being stretched harder than ever, you will appreciate the many thrifty suggestions for using the less expensive cuts of meat. Nourishing and delicious dishes may be prepared from them, which may offer many changes in the menu. Remember, much of the meat is needed by our boys, and the use of some of these meat cuts that are less important for supplying the armed forces definitely helps in the conservation program. Don't throw away dry or stale bread, biscuits, crusts, or crumbs. There are many ideas here to help you use them in interesting and delicious ways. And so after that, it gives suggestions for how to use these breadcrumbs for other things. It also has helpful suggestions for leftover fat or drippings. And these are some of the many ways you can be thrifty in the war days. So there is a lot of interesting stuff in there. I really like that she points out that what would seem thrifty and economical to some people in the country might be a real extravagance to others, because the country is huge and things grow differently in other places. So she mentions nuts, how in some areas nuts are plentiful, but maybe not so much in other parts of the country. Same thing with like citrus fruits. It might be super easy to get citrus fruits if you're in California or Florida, but in other parts of the country, it's more expensive, and you're dependent on when they ship them to your store. And quite a few times in this book, she makes reference to the First World War, and I really like that. I like that she talks about how there's much to be learned from the First World War and the rationing days from then. So, as an example for one of these thrifty variations is for baking powder biscuits. I really like this one. Biscuits are just so versatile, and she points out so many different ways to use them. So she has the basic biscuit recipe, and then the thrifty changes are cheese biscuits, cranberry biscuits, date or raisin biscuits, drop biscuits, fried biscuits, nut biscuits. Then you can do rye, whole wheat, or bran biscuits, scones, soda biscuits, so replacing soda instead of the baking powder, and then using buttermilk or sour milk in place of the milk. Southern corn biscuits, shortcake, and you can do that sweet or savory. For desserts, you can serve it with fruit. And then the two last suggestions are to use biscuits as a top for a meat or chicken pie, and for pigs in blankets. So you can cut the biscuits, like you roll them, cut them into squares, wrap them around a cooked link sausage or a hot dog, or she calls them wieners, and then you bake them. And you can serve it with or without white sauce, leftover gravy, or hot tomato juice. So all of those different ways to enjoy biscuits. And that's what this cookbook is full of. All of these thrifty changes to use just what you have on hand. So all of these cookbooks have different approaches to planning meals, but they do have things in common: nutrition, thrift, eating seasonally, reducing waste, saving time, and morale. Now, it doesn't help to just talk about menu planning. You really have to take a look at them. So I will have pictures from these cookbooks of the menus on my website, victorykitchenpodcast.com, for you to take a look at. Now, when I was planning this episode, I was feeling a little bit lost just because it can be a really big topic to talk about meal planning in general. But when we're talking about wartime menu planning and just all the different ways that you could do it, it was just a little daunting. So I went on Instagram and I asked my followers what they wanted to know about wartime menu planning. So I wanted to go over some of the things that they were curious about. Kimberly wanted to know how to stretch ration points. And this is a huge topic all by itself. But, most wartime menus planned for stretching rationed items. They incorporated, less fats, or stretching the fats that you had by, rendering fat from meats that you cooked. They use less white sugar, and instead, in the recipes, they suggest using brown sugar, honey, molasses, and maple syrup. There are lots of recipes for stretching meat. A lot of times you're adding things to the meat to make it go further. So like breadcrumbs or even crushed cereal or oatmeal. There's lots of different ways to do that. Also, they always talk about canning your own fruits and vegetables, soups and meats. All of these things were pretty much a given in any wartime cookbook that you encounter. There are some exceptions where the cookbook authors or publishers just pretty much ignored that there was a war going on, or at least they don't make any mention of it in the cookbook. So it's hard to tell if they have wartime meal planning in mind when they wrote the cookbook. So that's an interesting aspect. I think the Alice Bradley menu cookbook, this is one of those cookbooks. They do make mention of the war at the beginning, but when you're looking at these menus, some of the items, I'm like, what is that? It's very fancy and very complicated menus. So I think this book, they just kind of put that at the beginning, like, oh yeah, there's a war going on. Here's a few little tips for you. But, the rest of the cookbook, you just kind of have to figure it out for yourself. All right, next, Kara wanted to know how to plan meals for children in wartime. Most menus that I've studied were generally for a family of 4, 2 adults and 2 children, or a family of 5, 2 adults and 3 children. Most of the time, they just tell you to adjust the portions according to the children's appetites. They don't really give you a specific thing, except in the Modern Family Cookbook by Meta Given. That's where she actually lays out, like I mentioned before, how many calories a growing child needs. And many times, if you look at like children's lunchbox menus, the portions are really just smaller versions of what the adults would be eating. So if you're planning for children, looking at wartime menus, you're considering just smaller portions for them and larger portions for you as an adult. In other cookbooks from wartime that talk about children's needs, most of the time they just emphasize that they need more milk. They need to have a quart of milk a day. And that's about the most they talk about besides the standard nutrition needs. Some wartime cookbooks talk about making baby food like purees, but those are kind of hard to come by. And commercially prepared baby food was also available at the time. So for busy moms, you just like today, you could go out and get a jar, some jars of baby food. All right, next, Sarah wanted to know about budget-friendly and using limited groceries on hand kind of tips. Now, I happened to run across in the year-round edition of the Health for Victory Meal Planning Guide, they have a little section called Divide Your Food Dollar This Way to include all the basic 7. And it says, of course, it's not practical to lay down hard and fast rules. Rising costs, seasonal variations, methods of buying, for milk particularly, and the size and makeup of your family will make a difference. However, keep as close to these proportions as you can, and you'll spend your money for health as well as food. And then it goes on to list how much of your budget should go towards the different food groups. So 20 cents or more for milk and milk products, 30 cents or more for fruits and vegetables, 25 cents or less for meats, poultry, fish, and eggs, 15 cents or less for breads and cereals, 10 cents or less for fats and sweets. So the fats including butter, fortified margarine, shortening, salad oil, and salt pork. And then in another section in the same book, it has a section called Now, when some foods are scarce, what then? Here are some other ideas that may help. Then it says, more often than not, there'll be an alternate food or ingredient that will do nicely. You may have to change your plan a little, but it can be done easily with a little imagination. Be sure the alternate food is taken from the same basic 7 food group as the original. It's always possible. Otherwise, you may not get what you need. So it goes and has this handy table that lists the food like meat, shortening, milk, citrus fruits. And then it tells you you can use these other things as alternatives. Or on another part of the table, it says you can extend it this way. It won't do much good for me to read all of this. It's a lot of information. So I will also have a picture of this on my blog that you can look at on ways that they suggested to stretch your foods. Now, when I was reading about the different prices, how much you should spend for each food group, you're probably thinking, those prices don't mean anything to me now. No, they don't. And so the only way that we can really make use of that is if we do the calculation to incorporate inflation over time in for today's food dollars. And I will have that calculation on my blog. I think I've talked about it before. I'm a big advocate of this because a lot of people are like, oh, things were so cheap back then. And if you just look at the number, it doesn't really mean anything now. You really have to factor in inflation and, make sense of it for today. So this calculation, I'm not a math person by any means, but it's very handy for historical purposes, kind of getting a rough idea of what things really cost in today's dollar back then. So I will have that calculation for you so you can kind of do the math if you'd like to figure out, how much of your budget that they suggest you use from the 1940s anyway. When it comes to using limited groceries on hand, the cookbook that I have, Thrifty Cooking for Wartime, is really a great resource for that because it doesn't use any menus like we talked about. And it's really just using what you've got, just looking at these basic recipes and then, using what's in your pantry to dress it up in a different way. So I guess what that whole idea is just keep your cooking plain and simple. And then you can make it different by using what you've got on hand. This is a practice I know I could be better at. There's lots of things lurking in the backs of our cupboards that we could use to dress up our meals, because I think maybe 40% of what's in my cupboards are condiments. And I don't know why, but they can really go a long way to, spicing up our foods. Okay, so Gina wanted to know about portion size and if soup was served with most dinners. There was a very fun conversation going on Instagram about the portion sizes, because this is a huge pet peeve of mine when it comes to ice cream, as probably a lot of you have already read about on my Instagram account. And wartime portions were definitely smaller. Just in that time period in general, portion sizes were much smaller as compared to today. And you can find evidence of this just by looking at dishes. The dinner plates back then were much smaller. The coffee cups were much smaller. Today, like, coffee cups are like mini boats. I mean, they're huge, and our dinner plates are massive. They're like serving trays. So it's just a very different food culture now. So when it comes to preparing wartime recipes, this is something I've been learning most recently, is when you go to bake something in a pan, it will turn out very different if you're using a modern sized pan. If they just say use a medium sized dish, it's really hard to know, in the 1940s what that meant, unless you have an original dish to compare it to from that time. And so I have made things in like a modern size bread loaf pan, and it was too big. I do have a smaller loaf pan, and when I've made it in that, it turns out much better. Like, the size looks more like it's supposed to. So this is something I just never thought I'd encounter. I mean, serving size is one thing, but like when you're making, like, baking something or cooking something in a dish, it can change, just because our dishes are so different now. So I think if you really like to get a good sense of, portion sizes in this time, invest in some inexpensive dishes from the 1930s or 40s and eat off them and just see how different it is. I I recently acquired some sherbet cups, and they are the perfect size for ice cream in my opinion because it's just so small. And I really love that. I love that it limits their portion. All right, I could go on about this for a long time. So let's move on. The other question she had is soup served with most dinners? What I found in wartime meals is that soup was usually a lunchtime menu item. Dinner usually featured a main meat dish or a casserole. There were exceptions, of course. I found in like fuller menus with a lot more options that sometimes they do include soup. And I found that in the Alice Bradley menu cookbook, she has soups pretty often in the dinner menus. But in other wartime cookbooks, I usually only encounter soups for lunch times. Okay, so Kelsey wanted to know, how did they grocery plan? So grocery planning was a very tricky affair. Not only did they have to plan around their local grocery store sales, they also had to plan how to spend their ration points. Then you add in menu planning, and it was a surefire way of getting a headache. That's why we see so many resources that were made available to women to help them, like ready-made menu plans. Many grocery store ads listed popular food items and their ration values at that moment in time, which was a really nice way to get a quick view of what it would cost you in points before you get to the store. Newspapers would also have lists of rationed things and their point values for the coming 2 weeks. Amy wanted to know, how much of a role did international cuisine like Indian food play? Now, this American food, this is going to be different than British food. The British had Indian influences for quite a bit longer. So curries were definitely more part of their cuisine than in America. In general, international cuisine played a small part in mainstream American cookbooks. I found references for lots of British and French cuisine. Then there's some Chinese, some Spanish. I even found some for Norwegian, Irish, Italian, and Russian foods. Though I am a little suspicious that a lot of this was Americanized recipes. Now, there are some cookbooks from wartime that are in the international niche already, like the United Nations Recipes for War Ration Cooking or American Women's Voluntary Service Cookbook. They feature recipes from other chapters of the WVS. Then there's the wartime edition of the Russian Cookbook for American Homes. And then Cooking Without Cans by Betty Wason. She traveled abroad extensively, so she includes a lot of international recipes. Then there's Herbs for the Kitchen by Irma Goodrich Mazza. And she was married to an Italian man, and so her whole cookbook is about her journey of learning how to use herbs in the kitchen, because her husband grew up with lots and lots of herbs and flavors, and she did not. So she had a steep learning curve for cooking for her husband. And so that's actually a pretty delightful book to read. So these are international already in their intent. So those are the best types of cookbooks to look out for if you'd like to try some American geared international wartime cooking. Sydney said that she would love to see their tips for repurposing leftovers into new meals. And just by chance, the cookbook feature for this episode has a page dedicated to this topic. So I will have a picture of that on my blog for you to look at. '40s Lance wanted to know how to get started with wartime menu planning. If you want to get started learning how to menu plan like they did in World War II, I'd say the best way would be to buy a wartime cookbook with menus, like the Modern Family Cookbook by Meta Givens, if you really want to dive in deep, or a Health for Victory meal planning guide. I'd say these meal planning guides are the most affordable way to kind of get into wartime cooking. Right now they run between like $6 and $20 depending. So they're really affordable option, and they've got lots of great information. They're all different. So, they're all fun. I love them all. Since these have the menus and the recipes already in them, you would be all set to dive right in. Now, if you're not quite ready to commit to that level, head on over to my history website. That's www.history-preserved.com, and click on the tab that says Wartime Menu Challenge. Was it last year? I think it was last year. I tried out one full menu each month for 6 months, and this was way harder than I ever thought it would be. But each month I also provided a free download of a week's worth of menus and the recipes from different wartime resources. So this is, like I said, it's free, and you can download these PDFs, and I'll have a link for that on my podcast blog so that it'll be easy to find. I wanted to thank my followers on Instagram for responding to my question and telling me what they wanted to know about wartime menu planning. I hope I answered your question, and if not, you can definitely get in touch with me on Instagram, and I can help you get that question answered. Today's cookbook feature is A Guide to Wartime Cooking, prepared by Meredith Moulton Redhead, PhD, and Edith Elliott Swank, MS. And this was a cookbook published for the H.J. Heinz Company out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1943. Now, in this cookbook, the contents include some introductory things like talking about your biggest job is food. We need well-balanced meals. And then it's got a really cool page with pictures called their 9-point plan for wartime eating. I'm definitely going to have a picture of this on my website because it is really cool to look at. Then they've got menus and recipes. And what's cool about this cookbook is that it's arranged according to shift, working shift. So daytime shift, first night shift, late night shift. Then it has the lunchbox section. They talk about how to plan the lunchbox meal, a master plan for lunchbox meals, pointers on preparation, packing the perfect box. Then it has sandwich filling recipes, tips on food management, uses of leftover foods, and then it encourages you to join the fat salvage program. This is just a really unique book. I don't think I've encountered any other book that has the recipes organized according to work shift times. So just a neat concept. And I also love the fact that they have a heavy focus on the wartime lunchbox. So this was definitely a cookbook to help out housewives to make sure that you're getting the people who are working these shifts the right nutrition, or even nutrition for yourself if you're working one of these shifts. In the section, Your Biggest Job is Food, it says, "We know you women have a big job running your homes today. We know, too, that you are doing it well. And you don't look on this job as something to make much fuss about either. It's just part of your everyday work. A few years ago, you made the short pay that came home on payday go as far as you could. You learned to manage with the money, not to buy the kind of food you wanted, but the kind of food you could afford. There wasn't much variety to the meals you served, and the family hoped they'd never have to eat that way again. Well, the times have changed. The pay envelope is bigger, much bigger, but you have food problems still, for you can't buy everything you want today any more than several years ago. Now there are rationing and substitutes, priorities and lend-lease needs. Food must be conserved this way so our fighting forces may be fed, our allies spared greater suffering and want. So again you will manage, just as you did when money was scarce. We hope we can help you a little. We know you women all have different problems. Some of your men work at night. Some are fussy about their food. Some have trouble adjusting to nighttime eating. Some sleep poorly in the daylight. Others are disturbed by the school children coming home for odd-time meals. But your biggest job, The job all women must face alike these days is managing the food supply, shopping under the point ration program, using substitutes when essential foods are scarce, planning meals your family still will thrive on, packing a lunch pail that will keep your man strong and healthy, wide awake on his job. We hope this little book will help you in that important part of your daily work. I really like this introduction. I like that it makes reference. It doesn't say it directly, but it's kind of making reference to the harder times of the Depression, that they had hard times with food before. They just bought what they could afford. And now, but even with bigger pay envelopes, they're still having to be careful about food because of wartime shortages. So the fact that they're, appealing to that, I think says a lot. It's, what a lot of people worried about. Now, of course, it's a Heinz cookbook. So any of the products that you could buy that was Heinz is featured in this book. It has pictures of like generic sugar, and it just says sugar on it, and honey, because I don't think they offered those things. But for the tomato juice, there is a Heinz tomato juice can. Now, I wanted to try one of the menus, but life got in the way. So I ended up just trying 2 recipes like usual. But they've got some really yummy looking recipes in here, like peanut butter French toast, spice fingers, that sounds good, frothy hot cocoa, and then they have this fish with fluffy sauce. That just sounds really funny. But what I tried was this thing called cheese rice loaf with tomato sauce. And this is a dinner menu for the late night shift. So the whole menu includes cheese rice loaf with tomato sauce, glazed carrots, mixed green salad, and then for dessert, peanut honey apple crisp. So the rice loaf and the apple crisp are the 2 recipes that I made. I was a little suspicious of this cheese rice loaf with tomato sauce recipe just because, the name leaves a lot to be desired. But I gave it a go because it looked pretty simple. It just has 3/4 cup uncooked rice, a half pound, this is so much cheese, of American cheddar cheese grated, 2 eggs slightly beaten, 1 tablespoon milk, 1 teaspoon salt, 1/4 teaspoon pepper, fine dry breadcrumbs, and then 1 can of condensed cream of tomato soup, Heinz brand, of course, undiluted. So you don't add the water to it. And then parsley. So what you do, you cook the rice in salted boiling water until tender. Then you drain the rice and rinse it with hot water. I thought that was interesting. Then you add grated cheese, the beaten eggs, milk, and the seasonings. And this is where it got really interesting. You put this mixture into a well-greased loaf pan, which has been sprinkled with fine dry breadcrumbs. That's really cool. Instead of, like some cakes, they have you dust it with flour, but this was with dry breadcrumbs. And I was curious about why that was. You bake it in a moderate oven, 350 degrees, for 1 hour. Then you unmold. You heat the cream of tomato soup, and you serve over the cheese rice loaf and sprinkle with chopped parsley. This serves 6 people. So what I ended up doing was I used some just regular long grain rice. I did not salt the water because it has a whole teaspoon of salt, a whole stinking teaspoon of salt in this recipe. And it's got the cheese. I thought that was going to be way too much salt. So I left that out. I cooked it in my rice cooker because I seem to always burn the rice when I cook it on the stovetop. I didn't want to risk that. So did it in my rice cooker. I did not rinse it with hot water because I was using it right away and it was already hot. So I added the grated cheese. Now, I was a little short on cheddar cheese. I probably only had like 1/3 of a pound or 1/4 pound. Yeah, I think more of a 1/4 pound. So I ended up adding in the other cheeses I had. I had some Munster and I had some pepper jack. So I mixed those together. I'm always a big fan of mixing up cheeses anyway, to have just a different flavor profile going on. And so that's just what I used. I did everything else like it said. And then I put it in this, I used my smallest loaf pan that's as close to wartime sizes as I can get. And then I actually baked it at 375 for just half an hour because it's already hot and you're just kind of melting the cheese. So I'm not sure why they say to cook it for an hour, but here's another thing. I also covered it with foil. And I think this is very important because from my experience of cooking wartime loaves, they don't usually have you cover it. And then a lot of times it ends up dried out. So I didn't want to risk that. So I did cover it because I do not like crusty cheese rice. So I don't know. You might like it, but that's just what I did. And then when I took it out of the oven, I flipped it over onto a dish and it slowly unmolded itself. And I did run a knife around the edge just to make sure it was free. And it came out. And then I was just amazed. It had this beautiful, like ready-made, very fine crust from the breadcrumbs on it. And I just thought, this is brilliant. It looks so pretty and cute. I put the parsley on top and it just looked so good. I did try it with some tomato soup. I didn't have condensed cream of tomato. I just had regular, I did have Campbell's tomato soup, not Heinz. Sorry, Heinz. And we'd had it for lunch, so it's already diluted with water. But I wasn't a fan of the flavors together. The tomato, I actually thought it tasted great plain. And let me tell you, it is so good and cheesy. I think it would make an awesome gluten-free mac and cheese recipe without any mac. It was just really good. I even heated some up for leftovers the next day for lunch, and it was still just as tasty and very filling. So I give this one a big thumbs up. And yeah, definitely, it was a little on the salty side. So if you're not wanting that much salt, you can definitely cut down the salt. Just maybe 3/4 of a teaspoon or half a teaspoon. So very yummy. All right, the second recipe was peanut honey apple crisp. This involves 6 medium cooking apples, so about 2.5 pounds, 1/4 cup of honey, 1/2 cup flour, 1/4 cup brown sugar, 1/4 teaspoon salt, 3 tablespoons butter, and 3 tablespoons peanut butter. So the peanut butter is replacing some of the fat in this recipe. You peel and slice apples into a shallow buttered baking dish. You pour honey over the apples. Then you mix the flour, sugar, and salt together and then cut in the butter and peanut butter until it's all crumbly. No oats. Once again, I really like oats in my apple crisp, but a lot of wartime recipes don't have oats in the apple crisp. You sprinkle the topping evenly over the apples. Then you bake in a moderate 375 degree Fahrenheit oven for 30 minutes or until the apples are done. Or soft, I guess is what they mean. Serve warm or cold with milk or cream, and this also serves 6. This was a very straightforward recipe. I was a little curious about how the honey would taste with the apples. I felt that was a lot of honey, but it ended up being a perfect balance with the peanut butter topping. I never thought 3 tablespoons of peanut butter would taste so intensely of peanut butter. It is, you can't get around it. It's just kind of in your face, or I should say in your mouth, peanut butter. If you're a peanut butter fan, this is definitely the recipe for you. I like peanut butter, but I am a bigger fan of just plain old apple crisp. So I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but it was very tasty. I did enjoy eating it, but I think you definitely need a glass of milk to go with it. But overall, like the flavors all together work really well. And the peanut butter actually covers up any remaining honey flavor there is. So the honey worked really well. I was pleasantly surprised. And the next day it thickened up quite a bit. So it's still really, really tasty. I will have these recipes on my blog, victorykitchenpodcast.com, for you to check out and hopefully make them. And if you do make any of the recipes I've talked about on my podcast, please do, post about it and tag me. I love to see when people try out these fun wartime recipes. Today's story highlight comes from How America Lives. This was a series run in the Ladies' Home Journal that started in February of 1940. Each month, a new American family was featured, covering how they raised their children, what their home life was like, their jobs, community activities, and they even had a breakdown of their budget. The intent of this series was to give readers of the magazine a true cross-section of America. They featured families from all across the country and all kinds of economic backgrounds. In 1941, they even published a book full of these family stories called How America Lives. And I have a copy of this book, and I read it cover to cover. It was completely fascinating. During the war, special emphasis was placed on wartime jobs or service activities, which may not come as a surprise. I mean, if you look at any of these wartime Ladies' Home Journal magazines, they are just chock full of, wartime ads and stories about soldiers or nurses or, things of that sort. So it doesn't really come as a surprise that the families that they focused on, they really made a special emphasis on their wartime activities. The writing of these family stories may not be perfect, especially if we analyze it from a modern perspective, but they do offer a really valuable inside look at families' lives in the 1940s. In November of 1944, they featured a very famous family indeed, the Roosevelts. That's right, I'm talking about President Franklin D. and his wife Eleanor Roosevelt. I thought it would be really fun to learn a little bit more about the Roosevelts while they were in the White House, especially because this was a presidential year for our elections. So I just thought it was appropriate. The article has some pictures of FDR and Eleanor at home in the White House. The article talks about home life in the White House, including family activities, grandchildren and them having guests, what community/national work Mrs. Roosevelt participated in, besides any assistance she gives her husband in his work. They even talk about the Roosevelts' budget. I found this completely fascinating. And if you want to know how a president spent his salary, $75,000 salary in 1940, this is how you find out. It's from this article. And I will actually have a picture of this article on my blog, so you can read the whole thing and get more inside, details. But I wanted to focus on the specific section that talked about menus. It says, each morning, for those who are up and inclined to be about, a thoroughgoing bacon and egg breakfast is served in the family dining room at 8:30. But this doesn't mean Mrs. Roosevelt's day is just beginning. Often she's up at 6, has gone for a brisk canter in the park, had a dip in the swimming pool the Roosevelts have had built at the White House, opened her basket of mail and answered personally a good half of it by the time she appears at the table. Immediately after breakfast, she goes into her daily half hour with Mrs. Nesbit, the Hyde Park neighbor whom she installed as housekeeper in 1933. Guest schedules, seating plans, invitation lists are made out in this interval. Mrs. Roosevelt checks leftovers with the cook, makes sure there is Pedigree, the family favorite, if any of the children are expected, figures out the president's strict diet schedule, and then makes up the menus for the day. If she's about to start on a long trip, she writes out menus for 2 and 3 weeks in advance. A careful record is kept of all company dinners, so no official menu is ever duplicated. I want to take a quick little break here and tell you that I looked up Pedigree because I wasn't familiar with it. It's a traditional British breakfast dish made from curried rice, smoked fish, boiled eggs, parsley, and lemon juice. The article continues. The whole family likes simple foods. Given a choice, the boys invariably say emphatically, no made-up dishes, meaning they want a big bowl of soup, plain roast beef or a steak, and some fresh fruit for dessert. None of them eats pie. Rich pastry desserts appear only at company dinners, and then you can count the Roosevelts at the table by the number of untouched dessert plates. I can't even imagine that. I also wanted to briefly go over the part of the budget that concerns food. So the title of this section was called, Does $75,000 a year cover U.S. President's White House expenses? It says the food bill for all White House guests, including the Roosevelt children, grandchildren, and Harry Hopkins, not to mention the thousands of people called in for conference or who sip tea in delegations, comes out of the president's own salary, state occasions accepted, when protocol dictates who the guests shall be. No president can hope to spend less than $50,000 a year out of his own pocket for White House food, entertaining, clothing, and charitable donations. He foots all food bills for White House servants, 3 meals a day, 6 days a week, for a staff of 23. This is custom. Figure it out with the high cost of groceries in Washington, and it ain't hay. Wow, that's a lot of things I didn't realize. All of that comes out of the president's salary. That's really good to know. I don't know if that's still the case. I can't imagine why it would have changed much. I think for it to change, Congress would have to vote on it. Another last little tidbit that I thought was really fascinating was, it says, China is smashed to smithereens. Broken or chipped china is always smashed to smithereens to prevent it from getting into commercial hands via the ash heap and sold as a souvenir or copied in quantity and palmed off as genuine. So each president chooses their own china. And so I guess this is what they're referring to is, that current president's china, if it ends up in a whole complete condition in the ash heap just because of a chip, it could be stolen and sold or copied, which they don't want. This stuck out to me because when I was in my late teens, I was a volunteer at the President Benjamin Harrison home in Indianapolis, and they had pieces of his original White House china, which I just thought was so fascinating. It was really beautiful china. So just a really interesting little tidbit. I hope you enjoyed this look into the Roosevelt's life in the White House during the war. And like I said before, I will have a copy of this article at my blog for you to read and to learn more details about President Roosevelt and his wife while they were in the White House during World War II. Well, that's it for today's episode. If you or your family have American homefront stories, I would love to be able to share them on my podcast. To share your story, go to victorykitchenpodcast.com and click on Share a Homefront Story. We have lots of fun on Instagram. I share pictures of the food I make for this podcast and share behind the scenes and little things that I found in my research. So come on over and give me a follow. My handle is Victory Kitchen Podcast, and I would love your support, which keeps this podcast going. To do so, go to anchor.fm/Sarah Creviston Lee and click on support. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.